Okay, welcome everyone to WeHo Reads Poets Laureate Across America. I'm Cody Cisco, Executive Editor of Bookswell, which is producing the WeHo Reads Road to Joy series this year on behalf of the City of West Hollywood. And I'm so excited today to be welcoming the City of West Hollywood Poet Laureate Brian Sonia-Wallace, who has assembled a fantastic group of poets from the Academy of American Poetry who will be sharing their words with you tonight. So Brian, go ahead, and it's all you.
Thank you so much, Cody. Welcome everybody, and welcome to the 21-22 cohort of Poet Laureate Fellows for the Academy of American Poets. These are the folks who you see assembled before you tonight, Poet Laureate Squad. We are all poets laureate of a city or a state or a county across the United States, from California to Michigan to Massachusetts to Illinois to Wisconsin to Virginia. And we're so excited to be able to share this space together with you as we're reflecting on the end of our fellowships. So the big news, the old news, is that we all got $50,000 last year, which for poets is a lot of money, from the Academy of American Poets in order to better serve our communities. Laureate positions are often unpaid or low paid, and so this has really enabled all of us to be able to do so much more with these positions than we would have been able to otherwise. And we thank the Academy of American Poets for that. And I'm very excited and very curious both to hear some of the work that these poets have been creating and alchemizing during their terms, and also thinking a little bit within the theme of the Road to Joy about what's next for each of us on our various paths now that the money has run out. So I'll start us off with a poem, and then I'll pass things on to the next reader. We're each going to share a poem, and then we'll have a discussion and finish off by sharing a group piece that we created using an exquisite corpse game, which is where each of us wrote one stanza. Stanza is like a paragraph in a poem, but it means room in Italian. So we built this mansion of poetry and recorded a video of it, and we'll close off with that. So I'm going to start with this piece. It's called Unhistory. It's after Karen Finley's Artist Anonymous. And Karen Finley was part of a generation of artists, coming up on, 50 years ago now, who got the arts as a whole unfunded at a national level by the National Endowment for the Arts because they were doing stuff that was too risque and too controversial and freaked people out that taxpayer money was being spent on this. And so this is a piece after Karen Finley's Artist Anonymous. And if you all have questions, feel free to pop them into the question section, and we'll do our best to get to them when we're at the Q&A portion. This is Unhistory. We are powerless over art. Power is an attribute of relationships. We have no relationship with art. Art has a relationship with us. Art changes nothing. War never changes. Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War. As artists, most of our wars are for funding. Before the sacking of Troy, Odysseus promised riches. Like Helen, sure, beauty, whatevs, but don't you want to be rich and famous? Don't you want to be rich and famous, Achilles? Achilles knew he was going to die going in. He was offered a choice: live a long life and be forgotten on a faraway island, or go to war and live forever in songs after his body died. We're still talking about him, so we know which one he picked. Art is a sort of body. A body is always at war, in war, underwear. A body is a manifestation of power. The Greeks equated strength and beauty and godhead. For centuries, the sons of the wealthy in Europe read Plato and Homer and dreamed about tall ships and slaves and built tall ships and took slaves and land and called this Godhead. Even the word Godhead implies a body, God body. But that isn't a word. Sir Ken Robinson tells a story about schools and creativity. A 6-year-old is drawing. Her teacher asks, "What are you drawing?" She says, "I'm drawing a picture of God." He says, "But nobody knows what God looks like." She says, "They will in a minute." When I remember this story, the child is a boy. It's only when I look up the quote that I see it's a girl. I swap genders in my poem for accuracy's sake. In famous misquotes, when they told Winston Churchill that he should cut arts funding to support the war effort, he supposedly said, "Then what are we fighting for?" This is unverified. Art is mostly quotes. Quotes are mostly misquotes. This, I suppose, makes them art. Churchill, I believe, has been canceled for being a shithead. We are always writing new songs. We are powerless to stop. We are powerless to go on. Thank you. I will pass things over now to the Poet Laureate of Flint, Michigan, Semaj Brown.
That was wonderful, Brian. That was wonderful. Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. And hello, Flintstones. I'm here representing you. I want to set up this poem that I'm going to read, Black Dandelion, because it really has a life of its own. It's taken on an entire path. I was asked to write a poem about joy or happiness or wonder. And much of my poetry is about social justice, environmental injustice, women's equity. So in that, I don't have a huge catalog of happy poems. So I sat down to write this poem, and it still dealt with very serious issues, but I wrote it in the voice of a child. And so from that, it was published by Chapel Hill in an anthology. And then a video was made of it, an art video. And then what happened after the Academy of American became a fellow of the Academy of American Poets, that was the poem that was sent out all over the United States. Our poems were sent out in the Dear Poet Project and the world. And the letters I received were phenomenal from middle school and high school students. And they were very serious, and they were talking about genocide, and they were holding the pain and the trauma of their great-great-grandparents. And it was multi-ethnic, Armenian, Asian, and on. And from there, AT&T contacted me, and they saw me reading the poem in a video on my website, and they wanted to license a small excerpt to put into a national commercial for the Dream in Black Future Makers Afrofuturistic Lifestyle platform. And so it's a national commercial that's running right now. And from there, Black Dandelion, which is the name of the poem, has turned into a multimedia youth platform for youth expression. And it'll be launched October the 14th. And I just learned today that Black Enterprises has picked it up, and the AP reported on it. And we are very, very grateful and very happy to extend this widely across the nation. So, Black Dandelion. Age 4, witnessed my first mow down. Twinkling ground stars cut by a murderous lawnmower. Feeling the blade, I fell like a snail in grief. 12 full moons folded into spring. Perennial promises prevailed. Bees, oh, the bees celebrated the return of the dandelions in a skirt of twirling yellow bliss. Flowering bouffants mirrored my spiky little afro. Jagged edged lion's tooth leaves pay tribute to my snagger-tooth smile. Me and my freedom fighting flowers frolicked to survive. The scissoring, updigging, poisoning. Warning signs hovered like low-hanging clouds. No blooming allowed. Blossoms will be prosecuted. These brave plants grew just for me, grew in spite of a society that favored a monochromatic landscape. 1965. Mr. Brother Malcolm X was assassinated. Big word for a pre-kindergartner. I was convinced he must have been a dandelion. Reverend King, too, and the Johnson boy who lived one turn down the street that way. The Johnson boy was shot by the police for growing in a monochromatic landscape. Training wheels off. Bike riding across insecure cement. Oh, I pedaled the bumpy path, waving solidarity to each surviving sunburst noggin, each fulfilling the promise to ornament lawns and flourish souls with lemon drop hope. Dandelions bear art of endurance and escape, transforming into pearl puffs, floating with ephemeral intention, carrying the spirit of the weed. 13 full moons faded into July. I am a proud weed. Yes, I declared that shocking proclamation standing in the pulpit on Youth Sunday, Vernon Chapel AME Church. I added to my speech on David and Goliath my impromptu dandelion improvisational dogma. We are Black dandelions who will never be destroyed. We grow the power of goodness for generations into the future. I yet remember the hat-framed faces of the pious, the amused, and the mortified. Thank you.
The pious, the amused, and the mortified. Thank you so much, Semaj Brown. Let's keep moving across the country to Magdalena Gomez, the Poet Laureate of Springfield.
Aha, so I believe that to get to joy, we need to let go of that which is not joy. And this is a piece of release. And I started writing it when I realized that we were doing this event on Yom Kippur. And although I am not of the Jewish faith, Yom Kippur has always been a very special day of release for me, and atonement, which I also call at-one-ment. It's called Prayer for the Undoing of Knots on this Yom Kippur. Sadness, pull up your pants and go home. Silver and glass to the sink for a good scrub. Our indulgences are done. Inconsolable eyes, I've lost my lust for your salt. Grief, you windowless opium den, I take back the magic of dusk. Better the stink of living than the grave's seductive musk. Cacao spun into a semblance of love, the powdering of flesh and turmeric, the fragrances of bourbon and rum, the baths in milk as children starve. Done. Despair, demon father of weariness, monotonous in times of prayer to a God you doubt is ever there. Angst, you clinging feckless lover, have drained my face, stripped the last hint of russet from my hair. You and your legions of worry, your squadrons of fear, crawl back to your pilfered comforts of beheaded innocence with blood and bone stuffed bullhide chairs. Mercy, come, reveal the seed and root of evil's birth. May not a single person ever again doubt their worth or conjure to buy it back with bounties of war, delusions of power and fusions of greed, the rape of their mother, earth, hoarding for pleasure what others truly need. How strange it must be to the eyes of a child, confusion to the mind, threaded by wonder, heart, a nest for wingless stars. A mind that knows that all the world could be fed and free if we would dare to listen to the wisdom in the humming of a bee. Sadness, silence, demon of despair. Out, you angst, you grief, all of your sorrows, no returning tomorrow. I send you away with gratitude for all that I have learned from you. May hummingbirds bring their sweetness to your seed and root. In the meantime, as I wait for the sun, pull up your pants, we're done. Thank you.
Ay, gracias, Magdalena.
Gracias a ti, corazón lindo.
Siempre un gusto oír sus palabras. Up next, back to California. Woo! We have Georgina Marie, the Poet Laureate of Lake County.
Thank you so much for having me. Oh, these poems, they're gorgeous. When I think of joy, I think of belonging, and to be a poet laureate has been a joy, but it's also come with many challenges. But I've felt so much joy being part of this cohort with the Academy of American Poets. And I think 2021 cohort was incredible. We stay connected, and it's inspired me to be able to be more authentic and speak to things that I couldn't speak about before. So that's what leads me to read this poem. The term oppression is only one of many that the masses want to burn. How did my bloodlines follow the spool and thread from the Central American regions of Chihuahua, Durango, Zacatecas, to California sunshine, where a population basks in sun rays, for their skin to resemble how ours has naturally been for centuries? The history of my family was never written down. The DNA test only resulted in blood. Poems didn't survive voyages from country to country, state to state. I won't ever know if my grandmother used ink for prose when she worked on migrant farms in Nebraska, or if my grandfather ever mailed letters during the war. It is true that Latino men fought for America, but are denied credit, as if they only took and never gave. Imagine my ancestors blowing a horn in the wind with songs of their stories, singing me into spaces where I knew I'd belong without trying so hard. It has taken 34 years to define belonging, to walk into any given space and demand my existence be acknowledged. What is the word for, I work my way to success and can never gain enough validation? Is it the Mexican way to have to work so hard that the backbone is eternally sore? Is it the Indian way to feel there can never be enough vigilance for self-protection? Then there's the Irish and the German percentages, and what I am is a melting pot of international navigation that has always learned to do. How can I steer the ship when people are tired of race and I am only getting started? I stood in a crowd of white and was forgotten, and even the act of forgetting is an act of oppression. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgina. It's called to remember. I think we are quite ensouled enough, and it's time for an ad. So I would love to pass things back over. All of this work is made possible through the City of West Hollywood's WeHo Reads program, and I'm going to pass things back over to Cody to talk a little bit about what's coming up.
Yes, I'm the ad guy, I guess, right now, which is a funny place to be. No, but seriously, the City of West Hollywood puts forward the WeHo Reads series every year, which allows us to bring together poets from the city and abroad and all around. And so we thank them for that financial support. This series is also financially supported by the UCLA Extension Writers Program, which is a place that many writers in this area have gone to for instruction and for community. And also thank you to Poets and Writers, which has supported individual participating writers in this series through their mini grants program. We have a couple media partners we should also thank. Those include the LA Review of Books, bookshop.org, and Book Soup, which is a City of West Hollywood local indie bookstore where you can find many of the books that these poets have. I'll be posting some links later. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Che from the Arts Division of the City of West Hollywood.
Thank you, Cody, and thank you to all of our Poets Laureate from across the country for being a part of this event. We are so thrilled that you got the fellowships. We're a part of this great project and are a part of tonight's event. It's really great to hear all your voices and hear about all the projects that you've created. As was mentioned, I am the arts coordinator for the City of West Hollywood. As you have heard, the City of West Hollywood is the host of the WeHo Read series and of tonight's event. We would like to take a moment to acknowledge that the land on which the City of West Hollywood is located is the occupied, unceded, and seized territory of the Gabrielino, Tongva, and Kizh peoples. We know that we have people from all over the country joining us, all different time zones. So I encourage you to look up the native peoples of your lands at native-land.ca. This program is funded by the City of West Hollywood. We are very, very lucky that we have a supportive City Council that funds programs like this and also funds our Poet Laureate program. I have the honor of working with Brian Sonia-Wallace as our Poet Laureate. And we are so lucky to have one of our council members joining us tonight who actually writes poetry himself. So I will turn it over to our council member, John Erickson, to say a few words.
Way to out me. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you here in my living room, in my kitchen. Which one is from Wisconsin again? I heard the name Wisconsin.
Yes, she's stuck in transit on the way back from the airport. So hopefully she'll be joining.
Sounds like Wisconsin to me, if I have to be very blunt, as I am from Wisconsin. But hi, everyone. Councilmember John Erickson, happy to be here with you. Thank you for all the beauty that you bring into this world. This is such an amazing panel. I've been listening off key as I continue to work for Planned Parenthood, which is my day job. But listening to you has brought me a little bit more solace as I continue as we do the important work. But the City of West Hollywood is so empowering to support this work that you all do. And you just bring us that joy that we need a little bit more now than ever. And I just want to hold space for all of you. A lot of cities don't fund the arts. A lot of cities try to tell the arts what to do. That's not what the City of West Hollywood represents, but we try to actively strive for you to represent the best of our values. And from what I've been hearing tonight, that is ever so relevant. Thank you, Brian, for being my favorite poet laureate, even though Stephen's okay. Don't tell him that I said that. But all importantly, thank you all for bringing just a little bit more beauty in this world. We need it now more than ever. And I'll let you get back to the most important point, and that's all of you. Have a wonderful night. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much, John. Great to have that support. Let's keep things rolling with the poems with Chastity Gunn, the Poet Laureate of Elgin, Illinois.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. And it's been awesome to hear these beautiful poems. I'm feeling inspired. If I didn't have an 8 a.m. class in the morning, I might would stay up late and write tonight. But I'm so honored to be here. And for me, when I think about joy, I often experience joy when I'm cooking. It's an experience. I'm not a person who makes things out of cans or boxes. I am, I make things from scratch. And the poem I'm going to share tonight is about me making biscuits. I'm originally from Alabama, so I love to make Southern food. And so I grew up eating buttermilk biscuits. And so this poem is about that experience, but also the joy of the epiphany that I gained while making these biscuits. So I hope that you all enjoy it. The poem is simply titled Learning How to Bake Biscuits. Wash your hands of the sticky matter that clings to the side of your fingers, clings to the crevices where your fingers and palms become one, clings to fingerprints, the holder of your unique image. Wash your hands of this flour. Wash your hands of salt, of butter, cut into white powder like breadcrumbs from the Last Supper. Tap the base of the container once filled with a flour for every purpose, no longer useless, neglected, on a crowded pantry shelf. Tap the sides of your glass jar, hear the music hollowness makes. Let it teach you that every now and again, it's okay to be empty.
Thank you, Chastity. Up next, we have Luisa Igloria, the Poet Laureate of Virginia, the whole Commonwealth.
Thank you so much. Hello. It is so great to be here with all of my cohort, amazing poets. I have chosen actually 2 short poems to read for my 5-minute segment. And the first one is the poem that was selected to be part of the Dear Poet 2022 project of the American Academy of American Poets. And I have put the link in the chat for everyone if they would like to follow along. I'll read that first. Ode to tired bumblebees who fall asleep inside flowers with pollen on their butts. Usually it's the males. Maybe they've gone out with buddies in their leks, keeping their radar tuned for female bees as they move from sweet pea to mallow flower and snapdragon, gathering pollen in those hairy saddlebags called corbiculae. Maybe they have no place to return or are lost, having gone too far from the nest. Maybe the empty football fields and elementary school playgrounds, long unmowed since our common isolation and teeming now with yellow dandelions, proved too much. Sweet alyssum, phlox, wisteria cascading heavy out of themselves, honeysuckle and evening scented stalk, dianthus crowned with hint of cinnamon and smoky clove. Female bees will also burrow deep inside the shade of a squash flower. The closer to the source of nectar, the warmer and more quilt-like the air. In the cool hours of morning, look closely for the slight but telltale trembling in each flower cup. There, a body dropped mid-flight, mid-thought, how we all retreat behind some folded screen as work or the world presses in too soon, too close, too much. And my second poem is from my book, The Buddha Wonders If She Is Having a Midlife Crisis. Thank you. And the premise of this book is we always hear people say things like, the Buddha in me greets the Buddha in you, or I greet the transcendence in you, the idea that everyone is already carrying the seed of transcendence or transformation. But if that's the case, I thought, then the Buddha can be anyone. So I have sort of updated all of those narratives, and I had fun writing this book. This is my last poem. The Buddha goes on the internet to look for a licensed counselor and therapist and finds a practice in a street next to the drugstore where he fills his prescriptions. From among the photos on the website, he decides on the one who looks the kindest, a woman with chestnut hair and an old-fashioned first name. She's not really smiling in the photograph, but her eyes are. He picks up the phone and makes an appointment for Tuesday after next. What? You don't think this is a plausible story? You think the Buddha has no need to work out issues, or even that he has any issues? This is partly the problem. All the press he's ever gotten has him just about perfected. Every brass likeness and stone statue, from museum gallery to the home improvement section of Lowe's or Home Depot, depicts him in nothing but an attitude of pure serenity, even if next to him there is an entire box of manic-looking garden gnomes. Thumb lightly touching index finger in the Gyan Mudra, eyes two perfect almonds resting on the calm lake of his face. Who would think he has any need to unburden himself and his domestic woes to another? It's not easy to think of the ideal as less than ideal, of the one who serves as poster child having the same capacity for hurt and need that we all do. So then, whatever you believe, be gentle with the ones who've listened through the years and asked how they could take away some of your suffering. The ones who sat you down and showed you how to breathe in, then exhale slowly, one nostril at a time. The ones who patiently collected your tears in bottles smaller than your little finger and showed you how they could turn into something else if you laid them lovingly on the sill and gave them a chance to dry. Thank you.
Thank you, Luisa. Oh my goodness, that last poem felt so in line with the theme of today. We'll close out for now, and we may indeed have the poet Dasha Kelly Hamilton, the Poet Laureate of Wisconsin and Milwaukee, making a surprise appearance if she can get to her hotel in time. But for now, we'll close out with Lloyd Schwartz, Poet Laureate of Somerville, Massachusetts.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone, and for making this possible, and just how marvelous to be reminded that poets laureate are poets to begin with, and what good poets, what really wonderful poets. Thank you for sharing your poems with all of us. That was just enthralling to listen to you all. I wanted to pick a poem that in some way reflected how many different parts of the country we were all coming from. And this is a poem about traveling. And if there is an element of joy in the poem, it has something to, I think it has something to do with connection and how complicated that can be sometimes. And I want to say I have a reference to something called Masters of Money, and it's a book. It's a book that I never heard of before the experience that I write about in this poem. And it begins with the poem is called In Flight, and it begins with a quotation from Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest. And it's, did you hear what I was playing, Lane? And Lane says, I didn't think it polite to listen, sir. In Flight. A big, hefty guy next to me, an even bigger guy already squeezed into the window seat. Big, pleasant fellows, strangers before this 3-hour nonstop domestic flight. But they'd been talking away nonstop since before takeoff. Talking business, talking sports, China, India. My next seat neighbor might have been from India. Talking Cubs and Red Sox. They both love them both. Google, the euro, leverage, banks, bailouts, masters of money. Quote, it will change the way you think. Great deals and missed opportunities. Exxon, fracking, Megabus, Amtrak, breakdowns, lost luggage and missed connections. A good place to stay in Detroit. Neither Cheez-Its nor Diet Cokes inhibit the juggernaut. So much experience, so many theories, so much friendly advice. The urgent need to tell each other everything they know before the flight is over. The Indian fellow occasionally bumping my left arm in his enthusiasm. Exactly. Absolutely. All they've learned and thought, pouring out, yet steering clear of delicate subjects. Politics, they know better than that. Or home, an hour into the flight, my wife has become ex-wife. No names. Nothing about movies or television, no mention of any other book, no music, but thoroughly tuned in to each other. Exactly, absolutely. Handing over and taking in whatever they can in 195 minutes, like old friends, except not. As we begin our rough descent, a startling silence fills the cabin. One of them has drifted into sleep. Stretching to look out the window, I can make out farmland, roads, then tractors and cars. Some bumps, and the sleeper awakes. But the conversation is over. Shutting down, touching down, each of us left with our own thoughts of arrival or another departure. Then the busy powering up of phones, the clumsy lowering of overhead bags. Jamming the aisle, eager to get off and on with our lives. No handshakes, no goodbyes, but separated in the crowd, and each with a little wave. They call out, Sam, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd. Oh my goodness. I just finished taking a class on innovative poetic forms, and you're in the textbook, Lloyd. I just thought I'd let you know.
Wow.
You crossed your name and I said, I know that person.
Oh, wow. Goodness. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, it's ecstatic occasions, expedient forms. You know that one.
Yeah, that was a long time ago, but that's great that it's great.
Being taught.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm want to share that I'm a little bit smug because even though we are poets, we have finished the readings early. Thank you so much to the readers. We may have time for a second poem, but for now, let's open things up for a little discussion. And we'll do this pretty informally. If you feel moved to speak, feel free to unmute. We won't have any sort of strict organizational principle. But I'm really curious, as we're thinking about this theme of the road to joy, to start in the personal. And I know that I think many of us, and I certainly speak for myself, became a poet because I am a sad boy. And you have to sometimes do something about that. And writing things down seems like maybe the least destructive of ways to deal with that. And so I'm curious about all of your personal relationships to writing, and particularly to the idea of joy as a theme or as an outcome.
Much of my joy that I write about is the love I share with my husband. He is a miracle to me, and he is so inspirational and powerful and gentle and brilliant, and I'm more in love with him each day, and that's over 20 years. So that's my huge joy. His name is James Brown, MD. Hi, honey. So I just wanted to say that. So that is a huge part of my joy. That gives me the balance, since I work so much in other areas that are not joyful. I am very grateful that I have a really intimate personal joy.
I think I become very unhappy if I can't get to my writing. And I think it's the same way for a lot of poets that I know. And so I realized that poetry is where I prefer to go to kind of process what life throws at me. And personally, I think that there are so many stereotypes out there about artists and writers and how they are supposed to create out of a condition of suffering or misery only. But there's so much of that in the world, but that's only part of it. So I feel like any kind of feeling can be the instigation for poetry as well as for action. So we can be moved by even the smallest expressions of authentic feeling and thought. And that's why we go to poetry.
Why we write poetry and why we read poetry, and that it doesn't have to be happy or make us laugh, although it could. But there is something, I think, just as you say, there's something profoundly satisfying about coming in contact, or if we're lucky, even creating something, some genuine feeling out of what we do. And it doesn't just have to be happy to provide us with joy.
I love that distinction between joy and happiness. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Jump.
No worries. I was going to echo what Lloyd had to say, and I think just the act of writing and reading poetry is a joyful act. And a kind of an act of resistance alone. And so a lot of my work, Semaj mentioned earlier too, with her work, it can contain pretty serious subject matter, or, you know, we go to poetry, like Luisa said, to process so much of the world. So I think just that act is joyful enough, even if the subject matter is difficult at times. Writing poetry certainly brings me joy, even if it's processing difficult things.
I want to thank Semaj for describing my husband. Thank you so much.
I hope it's not the same person.
I don't know, Semaj, should we tell them? For me, you know, much like you, Brian, I was a sad girl. And so poetry was a way for me to distill that sadness into something else. But I very quickly, at a very young age, started to write about the sadness of others, and it helped me to develop a very deep empathy. And I found myself writing about the people that were the outcasts of my community. I grew up in the South Bronx when it was like the heroin capital of the United States, as well as the homicide capital. And I ended up writing a lot about addiction and prostitution. And I was in elementary school, but these were my realities of what I saw and felt and heard. And it developed an empathy in me that still entered even into my recent memoir, Mija, where I write about the heroin addict under the L train who used to call me pretty girl, and what she meant to me. And I always say that, you know, she embraced me without ever touching me. And what I think that poetry does is it returns the genius we had as children, because we become visceral viewers of life. We're not passive when we walk the streets. We're not passive when we meet another human being. We're actually seeking out who we are inside of them and who they are inside of us. So for me, poetry is sacred and fun and beautiful. And I write about horrific things and funny things and sexy things. And I love it all. And I love being with all of you. And I'm going to stop talking now.
That's gorgeous. You kind of bring us, I think, Magdalena, to the next question. I know, Chastity, if you want to weigh in on either one. But this idea of there's sort of an individual practice, but there's also maybe a communal or shared practice of joy. And I think so much of being a laureate is the idea that you're kind of, you know, you're still a poet for yourself, but you're also now tasked with being a poet for a community and with bringing that community into poetry. And I'd love to ask you all how poetry and your laureateships have become part of a shared practice of joy for you.
I'm going to be presenting October the 14th with Michigan Council Teachers of English, the keynote speech. And I'm going to be presenting poetry as a second language, passcode to literacy through the Semajian method. And so I'll be talking about how poetry can be a second language for the community, how we can actually take the elements of poetry and take the characteristics of poetry and apply them in our relationships, where we can look at the pause. The poetry is it's usually not rushed. It can be inspired, but we're going to look at the pause that's inside of poetry, the thinking, the contemplation, the hiatus, the silence. In that silence, there's the second language. And so that's very joyful for me to communicate this and all the different, I have 5 different principles about using poetry as a second language. It will change how we speak to one another, how we think about talking to one another, because we're going to have to, one of the things is take a beat, take a pause, rest. There'll be no absolutism when poetry is a second language. There'll be reflection. How many rewrites do we do? So that's what we need to be doing, rewriting how we think about our society, the systems that are in place right now. And poetry is the perfect vehicle to do that. So.
Your question made me think of Artelis Girmay's great poem, You Are Who I Love, which builds and builds on instance after instance of how anyone in whatever station is kind of proof of life, right? So I think one of the most important parts of experiencing the communal involves really seeing and noticing, making visible all of those things in the world around us that are so important. So one of my cornerstone projects as Poet Laureate of Virginia was to build a Virginia Poets database. And it's something that I think I hope will continue far beyond my term as Poet Laureate, because we need to identify who are we, who are our community, are we representing the widest possible array of poets in the state, and where are they? So I'm very excited about the life that this thing will continue to have beyond my term.
What I could add to that is I took the program that I was doing with the fellowship to a local juvenile detention center and using poetry to help the young people rewrite or write new origin stories. And so I just did week 3 on Monday. And the first 2 weeks, I had students who had never really read poetry. They didn't know what a line was, a stanza. I had a student that was really confused about the spacing. They're like, what is this? And, but there was this light bulb moment that happened last week, or on Monday, because I began to have them write about their origin story, their name, and what they wanted to be known for. And it was amazing because there were some students who were not, they were not into writing. They didn't want to have anything to do with poetry. And they were writing in this 3rd session. And to be able to bring that joy to all types of populations, I just think that's the beauty of poetry. And that's one reason why we need poet laureates in our community, to take poetry to all populations. So I'm excited to go back next week, and hopefully they're still going to be into it. I'm sure they will, but it was amazing for me to witness them realizing the power of poetry and how, you can rewrite your story through poetry. And so that's been a joy, to experience poetry in community.
My first project as Somerville Poet Laureate was I wanted to have a monthly meeting of whoever wanted to show up at there's a little library. There's 3 libraries in Somerville, and this was the smallest one, and the one that's closest to where I live. And I just wanted to have a people meeting, and it was a project that I called Let's Talk About a Poem. And I would choose a poem, usually it's usually a famous poem. And I figured, it might be that some people in the community would like to talk about poetry, and that it wouldn't be academic and it wouldn't be threatening in any way, but we would just sit around a little table at the public library and talk about a poem. The first poem that I chose was Robert Hayden's Those Winter Sundays, which is one of my favorite poems. And I don't know, 5 or 6 people showed up. And we had a very nice discussion, and no one else was a poet, but they were, people from the community who hadn't talked about poetry or even read any poetry since they were in, high school or college. And we just sat around and had a really nice conversation. But that didn't last very long because of COVID. And then the librarian, who is just great, Marita Coombs, give her a shout out, said, how would you feel about doing it on Zoom? And I thought, well, okay, sure, why not? Let's give it a shot. And suddenly there were like 30 people showing up, or 40, or I have a mailing list of 100 people now. I mean, 100 people never show up. It's usually, but it's 30 or 40. And some of them are poets, but mostly they're not. And they love reading a poem a month, and they love talking about it. And I think they feel very unthreatened. And I mainly pick poems that I thought I knew inside and out, and they are telling me things about poems that I thought I knew that I didn't know before. And there's just a tremendous joy and satisfaction in reading these poems together and talking about the poems. And that's just, some of them are sad poems, as we said before, but there was some just profound pleasure in reading poems together and talking about the poems together.
For my community, I live in Lake County, Northern California, and some people may know that this is kind of wildfire area. So we've been devastated by wildfires for 7 consecutive years, and we've had some years that, we had some small ones here and there. And what I was learning about my community here is that we were all traumatized by fire, for one, but all of that was really unearthing all of this other trauma we had, generational trauma, ancestral trauma. There's trauma going on still with, different challenges here with the Native people and name changes and all of these different things. And so when I became Poet Laureate, it was during another traumatic time, which was COVID. And so we have so much collective trauma in addition to our individual traumas. And so during my term, I think the most joyful thing that happened was that people were realizing that poetry can be used as a tool to get through this trauma and to process it and to create art with it. And many poets who, not even poets necessarily, many people who are writing and coming to me and being involved in the writing community now are people who maybe wrote poetry or maybe hated poetry, or there's also school board members who submit to poetry contests, or board of supervisors who like sneak in a poem here and there. So it's really interesting that, like Chastity said, I think having poet laureates elevating poetry to whole other levels is really important, but it also kind of provides this coping mechanism to really bring poetry to the people in this new way. And the other aspect to that is I think people have preconceived notions of what poetry is. It's all Whitman or it's all Shakespeare, and contemporary poetry just has no limits. There's so many different ways you can take it. And so many people are realizing that they can do anything they want with poetry, which is a really beautiful thing. So I think during my term, at least, community has been such an integral part of my laureateship. And I think it's kind of bridging this new relationship with poetry that's going to exist well beyond my term.
I love that. You're making me think, Georgina, about the importance of being visible as poets in a community and what that does to the community. One of the things that I've done just in this last year as things have reopened has been to host an open mic at one of the local gay bars, Mickey's in West Hollywood. And it's upstairs, and this is normally just like one of the trashier gay clubs, it like unabashedly so. And it's been really interesting to see. We've had, God, a good probably 100 people who've come more than once, and to start seeing them, we had two people yesterday work on a group poem and collaborate on writing something together for the first time. And we've got a number of folks who hadn't been performing their poetry at all before coming to that space, who are now sharing resources of other open mics together and getting involved in other LA poetry communities. And it's been really inspiring to see how just showing up and saying to people, hello, I am an artist and so can you, creates that sense of permission, I think, for people to pursue that themselves and for people to dream that for themselves. I hear an element of that in what everyone said.
In one of my, is it all right for me to speak? Okay. I don't want to interrupt anyone. In one of my recent experiences at a makerspace in Springfield, I walked into a room of young girls who clearly felt a need to posture because of the space that they were in, or whoever was there. There was a little bit of toxic masculinity in the room. So they were posturing, and I understood that. And what I had brought for them were photographs I'd taken of animate and inanimate in relationship. And they were middle school girls, and I showed them photographs. One was a young girl in a hijab looking up at a lamppost, and her eyes were just brilliant. And so I asked the girls, do you see a conversation between the lamp and the child? And immediately they were like, yes, they're both filled with light. And it was just so beautiful to hear the brilliant things that they were saying. They were shy about writing. So I took them through a journey of dialogue with the animate and the inanimate interacting. And I gave them just index cards so they wouldn't feel pressure to write a lot. So they wrote lines, and they weren't ready to read aloud. So they went around and read to each other. And that was so exciting. They were reading back, and when they finished, okay, now I'll go read my lines to the other one and to the other one and to the other one. And by the time they were done, they realized that together, collectively, they had built a poem. And it was just so beautiful. And I just love doing that work. And I love hearing when people are working with those who are incarcerated. That's so important. I can't wait to get back to the prisons. I did that a lot when I was in New York. I did some of it here. Some of the most brilliant minds I've ever encountered are behind bars. And I'm talking about poets that just blew me out of the water. And poets who had everything committed to memory. Some of them couldn't read or write, but had oratory literacy and oral literacy. And I think it's important as poet laureates that we acknowledge all of those literacies, which is why my first two books were done as CDs, because I wanted them to be accessible to those who can't read or write. And I think that we put too much, that when people think of literacy, they only think of reading and writing. But literacy encompasses so much: reading the stars, being able to hear music and respond to it, being able to dance. There are thousands of literacies. And so as a poet laureate, I feel responsible to acknowledge all of them. And even though I'm not poet laureate anymore, I've gotten involved in this civic engagement group, because I want our city to show more respect to poets. And I hope somebody from our city is watching this, because I'm going to be very vocal. I have been very vocal about it. And poet laureates, and especially the new upcoming youth poet laureate, which we haven't gotten yet because there is no system in place, which is what I'm still fighting for. A system in place of people who gather and read. And, I don't think it's right that I do it myself, because that's fascist. I don't want nepotism, oh, I like this kid. Yeah, he can be poet laureate. That doesn't feel right to me. So my battle is just beginning. I've proven myself through the city. They've asked me to perform with the symphony in January. which is very exciting. And they're also going to have their first, in a very long time, Black conductor. And he and I grew up in the projects together. So they've invited us both. So, you know, things are moving along. It's glacial and it's really hard. And Georgina, I understand discouragement in terms of how places respond, but.
Oh, there's Dasha.
Welcome, Dasha. Oh my
Dasha!
goodness. The
I'm
travel
shutting
god
my
allowed
mic so you can talk.
Oh, lovely to see you. Welcome, settle in, take a breath. It's so good to have you, and we'll close the discussion with your reading if you're up for that. Magdalena is starting to get into the territory of the next question I wanted to ask, which is what's next for everyone? I know some folks are done with their laureateship, some folks are just, you know, done with this fellowship. And I'm really curious to hear what's next and also how this last year has informed what's next.
So since Magdalena also mentioned the importance of literacy, my day job is actually as a literacy program coordinator for my county library. So that's my next step, is just continuing with that work and also incorporating poetry into our teachings. There's many people who've never read a poem for the first time. And I think that's one thing that I'm definitely trying to incorporate into our library program for sure. And then just continuing the path of bringing poetry to the people. We have, in a rural community especially, there's a lot of challenges with people who may not want to support the arts, especially when the marginalized communities are a part of it. So that's certainly a challenge. I think there's a lot of uphill battles coming my way, despite all that I've been able to achieve. But I think at the core of it is literacy. So I'm really happy that you brought that up, Magdalena.
Yeah, for me, one of the things that continues on beyond my term, with Eileen Casineto, who is Poet Laureate Emerita of San Mateo County, maybe some of you know her, and Dr. Jeremy Hoffman, who is the lead scientist at the Science Museum of Virginia, and we are co-editing an anthology of US-based climate change poems called Dear Human at the Edge of Time. And I'm going to pop into the chat some of the links to the Airtable submissions and the guidelines. And so we are looking for the widest array of poems on climate change experience, stories told from the ground of our lives, how we are afraid, how we are hopeful, how we have seen changes in our environment, what we are doing about it. And one thing, though, we do not want to see poems that have jargon in it. We actually want to go beyond the science jargon to get to the heart of the stories that we need to tell, because this is all of us, folks. There's no planet B, no plan B.
Community has provided the buoyancy for me as Poet Laureate. I have a tremendous support system in the community, and it's just wonderful. Even the social media community on Facebook, that's where I am most of the time, you know, Instagram some. I mean, they're amazing. Even the high school, and that's a long time ago for me, high school. The high school people I went to high school with, very, very supportive. My sorority, Zeta Phi Beta sorority, very supportive of me. And the community in Flint has been very supportive, the people. So what happens, I work with institutions and people, and that's been tremendous. So that's wonderful.
Thank you, Semaj. Who else has a what's next?
This is the centennial of the wasteland. And what's next for me is 2 group readings of the wasteland. So that's coming up in the next few weeks, and I'm really looking forward to that. Some of the best lines have been assigned to me, so I'm very happy about that. And I want to write some more. That would be nice.
For me, I've become a poet in residence with the Chicago Poetry Center. So I did a elementary school last year, and then this year I'll be at a middle school, and then continuing the work with the Juvenile Detention Center. And the folks who participated in the program that I did with the fellowship were like, you have to keep this going. So we're just starting back with just meeting once a month. Because I realize there's such a need for a community, for a space for people to get together and write poetry and to share what they're working on. So that's what's next for me.
And I'll jump in and just say I've been back to my sort of practice that brought me to poetry in some ways, was writing poems on a typewriter for people who asked. And it started off as something that I did on the streets and became something that I did at events. And COVID obviously put a stop to all of that, but it's been really beautiful to see it kind of roaring back to life. And I don't know how I'm going to survive this weekend. I'm going to so many hundreds of poems and coordinating with poets to come and be writing poems for the public is really exciting. But I've been working as well on really thinking about other places where poetry can live beyond the pages of a book. I really appreciate, Magdalena, the discourse. I mean, we live in a society where I think it's like 60 or 70% of people read it below, I think, a 6th grade level. And books are just not cultural artifacts that reach most of the population. So really thinking about poetry and music, thinking about poetry and TV, thinking about ways that this art form exists in literature, but also that it can enmesh itself in other things and reach people who wouldn't necessarily pick up a poetry book in that way and infiltrate their minds. And I'd love, Dasha, thank you. I'm so glad that you were able to join us. I know there's a couple of calls in the Q&A for people to post links to projects that they're working on, but I'd love to give you the floor for a little bit, Dasha, to share what's going on with you, what's next for you, and then also some of your work if you would like.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you for making this space available. It's even though we're still in Zoom squares, it's good to see all of you. And just even for me briefly to share this energy. So I clearly need it. What's interesting, what I'm excited about on the laureateship, as you know, when we first started, I was concurrently the state and city laureate. So the project of state laureate was also aimed at my hometown as a city work, which is bringing in the Youth Poet Laureate program. So spent the year working on curriculum, pulling together institutions so that it won't be an exciting spectacle that fizzles away because support goes away. So it's being held up with large institutions, our library, our university, our school system, and a 30-year-old writing center. So we're excited. It's a class that the teachers can teach for credit. Our laureate, the youth laureate, will also earn credit as the youth laureate for the year. There's a writing portfolio. It's basically a humanities course and philosophy and society, and there'll be poems that work their way through. So I'm really excited about that. We did a training with the teachers recently, so they're excited to bring these dialogues into the classroom, and so that launches this semester. They're taking the classrooms now. We'll begin our applications. We'll have our first youth poet laureate for the city in Milwaukee in the spring, and so that also has me in a state of transition. And, we mortals don't always do so well with change, even when we yearn for it, even though I've been pointing towards this moment, and y'all, one day does show up. I don't know who needed to hear that, but I'm here to tell you, one day it shows up. So one day has shown up, and here I am, part of this travel on a national tour with this show that I wrote. And making cake is, it gives an explanation of race, class, and inequity in America by giving the history of cake. And so I'm telling stories. There are two bakers making cakes on stage live, and the audience, we have cake together and talk about what they heard. So to give you an idea of where it lands, I tell stories, I make them laugh, we giggle, and then I land on whiteness is the high fructose corn syrup of our collective consciousness. Yeah, so I'm in Kentucky, I'm in Georgia right now, and I was curious how the South would receive it, and so far it's been excellent. So I will share some pieces. So in part of this journey, in being a real for real now full-time artist and writer, imagine that. It's that shift of really being able to focus on this universe, whereas for the last 20 plus years, I've fit this universe in between all the other galaxies. So it's a great change, but still change. So in preparing for this show and being able to collect some of these stories, I wrote some pieces. And so I have a recipe book, which have actual recipes from the cakes that I tell stories about in the show, and then also poems and some original writings. So for time, Brian, 1 piece, 2 piece, give me a window so I don't go too far.
Do 2. Why not? You made it.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
You're here.
All right. Okay, I know which 2. Which of course now wants to be out of order. All right, chunks and slices. His mother moved the knife to the right and to the right, and she pushed the blade down. In spite of protests, carving a chunk of cake, quadrupled the slices she cut for my sister and me. Our smallish mouths, dusted with crumbs of her freshly baked sock-it-to-me cake, puckered greedily still at the block on Daddy's plate. On the ride home, he laughed with us about the cake chunk he didn't want. Adulthood pulled back a veil on this memory. Maturity granting me access to the previously classified family histories. Grown-up eyes recall Daddy's smile as more practiced patience than amusement. Enamored by sweet-tooth silliness, exhausted from teetering cake displays. I listen differently now to stories that drift down from family branches, fluttering down to blanket gnarled roots and falsified truths, kindling and keepsakes for us all. I've grown to savor the nutty gumption that bonds bloodlines to family trees. I taste the whip and whisk of heavy cream, an infusion of generational ache, our collisions of soul baked into every family bite. And the thing that is important to note, the audacity of putting the show together, in addition to telling the audience what whiteness is like, I don't bake at all. It takes too much focus and attention. I'll cook, but you don't want me to bake you anything, and I don't want to bake you anything either. So some of the stories of putting together ideas of cake are stories thinking about how they make this currency in family. So that particular piece was how we tend to, we've had someone bring us a cake as instead of offering an actual apology, right? So this one is called Potluck Pandering and the Bitterness of Sweet Cakes. Protected with Tupperware, double wrapped in foil, bundt cakes and layer cakes lowered gingerly like fragile porcelain, like pots of gold, like stacks of untaxable cash, like wagers, like house money, like newborn redemption and buttercream frosting. Crinkled aluminum peeled open in equal measures of judgment and jubilee. Grandma Pearl fought grasping tears that one Sunday when her cake fell, panicked to place less than her best beside Sister So-and-so's on a crowded table in the church basement. Thank you.
Thank you, Dasha. I'm so happy we had two pieces. Thank you everyone for being here for this conversation. Go ahead, Luisa.
I just saw a question in the chat or QA box, or whatever you call it. Do we have time, or is that? All right, the question is from Kathy Haley, and she says, Magdalena and the others might like to hear about young poets in the community. So this was one of my projects to create a Young Poets in the Community program with the help of the Poetry Society of Virginia. So we asked young poets all over the state to submit not only their poems, but also a proposal for their own public poetry project that they could carry out in their own community, no matter how big or small. So the 23 young poets that we selected came up with such wonderful proposals, ranging from an elementary school poet who decided to create a poetry walk around her school using Naomi Shihab Nye's The Blue Bucket and planting buckets at different stations where people could drop poems or pick up poems to read. Another young poet proposed a Writing with a Buddy project where teens in her community would pair up with teens from a refugee community, write and share stories and make friends, and just so many wonderful things. Some gave workshops, some were planning magazines, which they did carry out and execute and distribute in the community. So it is very inspiring, and it made me feel that, yes, poetry is alive. It's not dead.
Love that. Thank you all for the work that you've been doing with your communities, with the young people. It's so cool to hear. And thank you also to the whole cohort for your playfulness and for your willingness to organize together. And I want to close out the reading by sharing a poem that all of these poets have had a hand in. It's going to be published in American Poets, next month, end of the year, as well as being up at poets.org. But for right now, you can only see it here. So it's a special peek for those who've made it this far. And we, alongside, let's see, how many are we? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We, alongside 5 other Poets Laureate, created a group poem, An Exquisite Corpse. And so the game is that we passed each other one stanza, one piece of writing, and the people after us only saw the thing that came directly before. They didn't see the totality of the poem. And so it wasn't until the poem was finished that we were able to see what we all collectively had written. And in some ways, I feel like it's the perfect metaphor for this fellowship and this cohort. And it's been an honor to serve alongside all of you and to know that we'll be doing this work well into the future. So without further ado, here is the Laureate's collaborative poem. Always a shift in definition. Author into community worker. Not we are here to hear your voice, but you are here to give us voice. We seem to have mislaid it on the way to society. Did you bring a flashlight? Call it impropriety. We aim to misbehave, to remind you all your money is no remedy for a grave.
A poet laureate is a servant's heart on a stark canvas of parchment. The role is honey in the mouth and bitter in the belly. We are an unfolding scroll of judgment pronounced in sacred tones.
Laureate of faith found her, ancient stone under the moon, without breath, wind abandoned. In her core, fossilized poems recall We call words hemorrhaging force.
I was taught, heart with mind speaks truth. Dark bright, bright dark, and the infinite sheen of the in-between. Who am I? Are you to lift our voice? With calloused hands and histories, we carry each other. We honor our dead. We gather and plant the seeds, hoping to bend time to a softer curve.
Copper leaves sit upon a neighboring tin roof, and I can't help but believe these too are a lesson in speaking of soothe. Creation to nature, to observation, to writing it down, to a poem it becomes. The writer's blood filling with warmth to have created and continued, to have lived with bronze sights on a frozen morning.
Or in populous cities, the varied carols, where in poems, singing voices speak, speaking voices sing.
I was taught to gather only what belonged to me, to never pick wildflowers, but instead commit to memory the shape and sound of what they shelter. Painted lady, bumblebee. When I say speak poetry, I mean know the language of wild and fragile things. Speak of flight and firelight, how to measure a wingspan, a lifespan, a split second that changes everything. Carry each other, the poet says. This matters more than anything.
To not be wind weary, but to let the air guide you.
To make sacred our sadness unveiled into triumphs of story.
This unfolding, this cultural conjuring, this exercise in ritual. The poet does not write, the poet sings.
The poet whose right to song underrings and overhears, conjures covens, translates conjugation, folds into the public soil, rocks out again.
Smooth and jagged crumbs of earth, planted and strewn, surprising the toes of giants, leveling giants to ground level truths. Poets reclined into the landscape, clapping dirt and ink from their hands.
Ridding themselves of illusions and excess. Red clay makes fertile soil for growing imaginations and generations. Poets tend society's gardens, nurturing seeds, plucking weeds.
Thank you all so much. Laureates. I swear, every time I watch that video, now I think probably maybe I have to cry because we did that, and that was the year, and that was the cohort. Thank you for expressing so beautifully what this work has meant, and I can't wait to see what everyone does next.
Thank you so much. So beautiful.
Your verse was the first verse that got me, Luisa. I was like, oh, wait, she's speaking the truth.
It's beautiful. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, all of you. It's been just wonderful. We should keep in touch.
Let's stay together.
That's right. We should do this. Brian, thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Brian. That
It's
was great. Mike,
huge.
thank you. Cody, thank you. What a treat it's been to get to be part of this group with all of you.
Dasha, I'm so glad you made it.
Me too. Me too.
I am too. I'm just taking in all of these faces. Thank you for making this happen. At the last.
Now we can all
So
go.
young back
I want cake, and I want,
Now I want cake.
and I want biscuits.
Cake. Oh,
I
I
want buttermilk
totally-
biscuits, cake, and Magdalena, you had something else in your poem. You had some herbs or something that was good. I want all of it.
All of it.
I'm like hungry now. Buttermilk biscuits. Oh my gosh.
Oh,
And cake.
I had bourbon and rum in that poem, and
Yes, you did. I wanted. Thank you. Well, I don't drink. I forgot. But you had. Yeah, I don't drink, but still, you had some good fruit sounding things. You know. All of the work is so beautiful. You know, all the poetry is just all so beautiful. Just beautiful.
How about a laureate's anthology?
Laureate's cookbook. Oh my God.
Yeah, we should have a laureate's anthology. And you know what I saw? I saw with the Brooklyn poets. Do you all see that online?
Yes,
With the
I
Brooklyn
did. Thank you
poets?
for sending that.
Yes, they've gotten together and they've done workshops, and they're the Brooklyn poets, and each one has done a workshop on what their specialty is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just wonderful. So I did it was just beautiful.
All right.
Georgina, your work is just always touching me. Always.
Thank you.
We'll pass it back to Cody and the city. Beautiful to see all of you.
What a fabulous evening. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone, for the poems, for the appetite stirring, for all the joy and unity. It's what we needed. And so thank you. And I hope everyone has a wonderful night and a wonderful rest of your week.
I just
And
want to
thank
say
you to everyone who showed up.
Thank you all so much. You all made me cry, so thank you.
Oh,
And when you do the cookbook, we would love to do another event. That would be great.
Okay. All right.
You made my poetry boss cry.
Good. Thank you so much, West Hollywood.